on our series with the 3D model Ezekiel Millennial Temple. In this one, as you can see from the title, the measuring units and the height of the buildings. It's very, very important for us to understand the information that went into the things that you are seeing, so that you understand why we have a difference in what you're looking at with this model than what you look with other Ezekiel Temple models. We're really pleased to release the 3D model of the temple. It really helps to show you what it looks like in more than one dimension that I can draw and sketch for you. It's just amazing to see this come to life. So it's a huge blessing for us. Significant moment of time where we're in the 12th year of the king, the same exact season. In fact, I can show you the tent. We're here in Sukkot. But in this one, we're going to talk about something very, very important, and that is, what are our measuring tools, our measuring units to build the temple? We first must know what is the proper measurements. Just like you go to measure anything else with a ruler or a measuring tape, the scriptures actually provide for us the information as to how to do the proper measurements so that we don't use incorrect measurements. Now, we're going to have to use the biblical terminology throughout this series. So what we're going to do is we're going to describe things to you in cubits. Okay, and some of you are like, well, what's a cubit? Think about a cubit in simple terms, most of you are Americans, as 2 feet. It's not exactly 2 feet, but just think of it that way. So if I say something is a cubit, think of it as 2 feet. Okay, if I say something is 10 cubits, think of it as 20 feet. Okay, just to give you a rough idea, because we have to speak to you in biblical terms. So that's our main measurement of Ezekiel's temple. It's our main measurement of New Jerusalem, where we see the cornerstone 144,000 cubits. Okay, so there's principal measurements, okay, that are necessary not only to just measure out something small like 2 feet, but then something that goes into actually a mile. We're going to talk about the sacred mile as well in this presentation. So we have the cubit, number one. What is the cubit? It's 25.2 inches, which divided by 12 is 2.1 feet. That is the sacred cubit, okay? Then there's going to be built off that cubit something called a reed, okay? So John was given a reed to measure the temple. Now he's given a reed like a staff, okay? But we also believe there's significance in that reed, in that the reed is the allos, okay? The allos is the flute, and that note I just played is 288 hertz, and the length of this flute is exactly 25 inches. So this here is a cubit. Okay, so John was given a reed to measure the temple. Now we believe that reed is also to worship in the temple as the allos in Greek, or flute. Okay, so that is our first principal thing. We must know, what is our cubit? This is our cubit. 2 feet, 25.2 inches. All right, great. After that, we come into the reed, as we explain. All right, so this one is a cubit. Then the reed, all right, the reed is 6 cubits. Okay, so that's going to be 12.6 feet. Okay, that's going to be much larger. We do have other videos on this. This is just a quick summary. And then after that, our next large measurement, you can see we went from 2 feet to 12 feet. Now we're going to the line. And what the line is the line measures a perfect square and 2 angles of a perfect square. And the length of the 2 angles together, if you form like an L shape, is 1,000 cubits. So we have a line, okay, we have a reed, and we have a cubit. Our next one is called a stadia in Greek, or stadion. And what a stadion is where we get the word in English stadium. and that is a race. So Paul said, run the race. Well, to run the word race is a stadion, and that is how New Jerusalem is measured. 12,000 stadion in the Greek, okay? In the King James, it uses the word furlong, okay? 12,000 furlongs, okay? So what is that? That's going to be 1,050 feet, okay? So we have a cubit, okay, 2 feet. We have a reed, 12 feet. All right, we have 1,000 cubits. All right, that is, for simple math, that's going to be 2,000 feet. And then we have that's a line. Then we have a stadion, 1,000 feet. And our next one is a mile. And a mile is 5,250 feet. Okay, so those are our main 5 units of measurements. All right, now if I lost you there, don't worry. We have notes. We'll provide you the notes, and we're also going to provide you a description of the notes. We just want to point out that these are very important and significant for us because, as we said, it is the line, the plumb line, all right, that we need to really determine Ezekiel's measurements, because what he does is the line would also have a weight at the end of like a plumb line. Okay, so there's a plummet, and then there's another line, which it's not that the line is an exact measurement. There's one that's a measurement that we just showed you, but there's another one that just does the height. Okay, so if you use this, you would use this to make sure you're level. But if you had this as a precise measurement like this one, this is actually the full length of it. You can see I tied a knot, so I used a little bit. But basically what a meter is if you just take a string and swing it like that, the length of distance that it swings takes 1 second. So in order to go one end to another, the length of the rope that you need is a meter. This one is a meter, but it's a little bit shorter than a meter because I had to tie a knot, okay? So there you can see the element of time as it relates to measurements. We're not going to use meters, but we're showing you that the line is very important. In fact, I kind of mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about a number of the chambers, but really what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about those units of measurement, and what we're going to talk about is that measuring line and how we came into determining the sizes of the buildings in the temple that you see. If you take the 3D rendering that we have shown you, okay, that's in the intro of the video, and we also have that posted elsewhere. It's even on YouTube, it's on BitChute, and it's on Vimeo. Our intro is showing you that whole complex, okay, and there's some differences there if you go to look at other examples of the Ezekiel temple that other people have done. So we're going to talk about those differences in this presentation here as to, how we came up with those, okay? Guys, as we go about measuring the temple, and we are here in Egypt going about drawing the line, measuring the temple, the Great Pyramid, which you see here behind me, is built off this cubit of 25 inches. Now traditionally what a cubit is, it's a length that goes from the elbow to the tips of the finger, okay? However, the cubit that's in this structure, that if you know what this measurement is, you begin to learn about the dating system and all the civil engineering that's gone into it to determine the various measurements, okay? But this Great Pyramid is based off a sacred cubit. That cubit is 25 inches, okay? And also Isaac Newton has done some work on that. I'll try and reference the book that he talked about this 25-inch sacred cubit. Now, as we go about building the new temple, New Jerusalem, Ezekiel's temple, guys, this is the cubit that we need. We need the 25-inch cubit, okay? Why? Because it says in Solomon
that the cubit was of the first measure. And the first measure is this 20.6-inch cubit. Okay, we're going to go through that. We'll show you that cubit is clearly the math in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, but what we're pointing out is the Moses tabernacle. Moses was in Egypt. We're here in Egypt. We have this Egyptian royal cubit, okay, 20.6 inches. All right, this is the cubit that was used to build the tabernacle, within the structure of the tabernacle and all the instruments. That cubit is the Egyptian royal cubit, okay, and also the first temple, the house of David as we call it, also was based on this cubit. However, once we go into Ezekiel and New Jerusalem, it says in Ezekiel that it's a cubit and a handbreadth. Now, a handbreadth is a hand, okay? So that's this length here. So what that means is that when we go about building Ezekiel's temple, we're building his temple, we're building his house. When we do this, we need the proper measurement, okay? We need the proper measurement, the proper line. This is very significant because you can see the temple is like a mountain. It's enormous. However, the whole structure is based on something as simple and small as, 2.1 feet, or 1 cubit, okay? That then goes into this structure here. So that's why this cubit is very important to us. This cubit is also necessary not only in Ezekiel's temple, but in New Jerusalem. We must know this cubit, okay? And we'll get into more of those measurements as we go, guys.
Okay, here's our notes. Measuring instruments, cubit, reed, line, stadia, mile, or measuring units, we could say. And here you can see we have a cubit, 25.2 inches. A reed is 12.6 feet, or it is 6 cubits. We have a stadia, which is 1,050 feet. And we have a mile, sacred mile, not the mile we're used to, but that is 5,250 feet. Okay, so these are our main measuring units. And as we showed you, okay, our center of our measuring of all of this is a cubit. And so that cubit can be measured with a reed, okay, and a staff. By the angel of covenant, he said to rise, measure, metrio in the Greek, the temple of God, the altar, and worship in it. Or it could be viewed as those worshiping in it, because the temple service, the temple is built, the temple is ongoing, the temple service is happening. So measure the temple. It's called sacred measurements, sacred architecture. Okay, that's what we're doing. So the first thing we come to terms with, as we explain, is we have the cubit of the first measure. This is the Egyptian royal cubit that we were showing. This is the inscription in Saqqara, Egypt, that dates back to Joseph, that shows us the precise first measure is 20.6 inches, 0.532 meters. The Egyptian royal cubit we were showing in Egypt, that was in Saqqara, and that was by Joseph. So we actually have archaeological evidence of this precise measurement of 20.625 inches. Okay, that's the Egyptian royal cubit. And then we are explaining that there's a sacred or great cubit, so that we have Moses' tabernacle, we have the first temple, but then when we get to Ezekiel and New Jerusalem, we have a different cubit than the previous ones. Now we're certain of this measurement and everything because we apply the measurements of the Ark of the Covenant here, which is 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. And we find something called the golden ratio. Okay, the golden ratio is 89 divided by 55, or 1.6181. I think this is also called like Fibonacci. But basically what we do is when we divide this ratio, we can see it comes close. 2.5 divided by 1.5, okay? Now there's a distinction because the golden ratio, as we said, is 1.61881. So that means that there's a difference between the 1.2 okay, and the golden ratio of 0.4848. Now, what is 0.48? It amounts to basically 1 inch, 0.9999 inches. That is, once we subtract the 0.4848 from our sacred cubit of 20.625, we get 0.9999 inches. Now, what does this mean? This means that the thickness of the Ark of the Covenant wall of the box, okay, is 1 inch. Now, once we take these measurements and apply them together, where we have precisely 20.625 inches, and we have precisely the ratio called the golden ratio throughout creation, we do see within the Ark of the Covenant the confirmation of the 20.625, or in meters, it's 0.532 meters. This gives us our first measure, okay? This is what it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 3, okay? And it is the cubit of man in Deuteronomy 3:11, okay? So we first must come to terms with the old first measure cubit, all right? And we have that there. Then we must come to terms with the fact that it changes, okay? In the Ezekiel temple, we get what we call the sacred cubit, or the great cubit, as Ezekiel calls it. And so the same angel of the covenant that had the reed that gave to John, he is in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 5, measuring, metron in the Greek, mida in the Hebrew, and he has a reed of 6 cubits, okay? And that reed of 6 cubits will show you, a reed we found in Israel of a 12-foot reed, all right, by a cubit and a handbreadth, okay? So this is the expression we begin to get. He has a measuring reed of 6 cubits by a cubit and a handbreadth. So what was our cubit? It's 20.625 inches, all right? Now we increase that by a handbreadth, or 4.6 inches of a handbreadth, providing us with the great cubit, or a larger cubit. So in Ezekiel 41, verse 8, it was a full reed. So what the full reed is, it's a full reed because it's a great cubit. It's not the previous cubit. It's a full reed, has 6 great cubits, and each cubit is 25.2 inches. We do have other videos on this. See video, what is a cubit, and a sacred cubit, where we get more into detail, because if you want to look further into this, we definitely understand we have more information. We're just going over the basics and a recap, because we haven't covered this in some time. And then next we have a measuring reed.
Then in Revelation 21, there's another measurement, and that is a reed, a golden reed. So an angel has a golden reed, and a golden reed, guys, is I believe it's 6 cubits, or it's 12.5 feet, okay? I'll go into the math a little bit later to describe in detail these, but I just want to give you a visual representation of a staff or a walking stick measurement and a reed. Now we have a reed here. And this is a reed. It may not even fit in the whole video, but the angel has a reed, which is also seen in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel as well, we can see this reed, and he goes about to measure the temple. So I'm doing this all the way back here, so you can see how large a reed is.
Okay, there you could see, as we have mentioned, the measuring reed, 6 cubits, or 12.6 feet, all right? And this we see in Revelation 21:15, a golden reed measuring metron, a reed to measure the city, the gates, and the wall. And the city was 4 square, okay? So he's using a measuring reed that is measuring a stadia. Okay, let's talk about the next one, a measuring line or stadia. Okay, now in King James it's called a furlong, and this is 500 cubits. Okay, 500 cubits. This is the dimensions of the Ezekiel temple, 500 cubits. That is 1,050 feet. Okay, so in Ezekiel 40, verse 3, the angel of the covenant has a line or a belt of linen. Okay, a line in his hand. And then in Ezekiel 47, verse 3, he has a line and he measures 1,000 cubits. Okay, which is the kwa in Hebrew. It's a survey's line. All right, now the reason it has a kwa because 1,000 cubits is 500 times 2. So what he's doing, he's measuring the length and breadth because it's a perfect square. So this is what we see in Zechariah 1 verse 16. He stretched out over Jerusalem, okay, a line to measure the width, which is what? 500 cubits. And the length, which is what? 500 cubits of the temple. And the runner is told to run. Now, running here, this is a stadion, okay? So then there's a runner here in Zechariah chapter 2. He's told to run, as in the stadion, the furlong. This is what we said in Revelation 21:16. So the sanctuary, Ezekiel's, is 500 cubits, 4 square, all right? And New Jerusalem is 12,000 stadion. It's the race, okay? We see the race, Hebrews 12:1. And it talks about the amphitheater. So we have, you can see here we have a race, all right? And this is the runners, they're running in this circle. And then they go inside the amphitheater. So in our modern stadium, the whole race happens within the audience. But in the ancient Greek Olympiads, they ran outside of the stadium and then they came into the stadium where the people were, so they only cheered and saw a portion of what they were doing. This is the principle of this stadium. So we do know the precise stadium through architecture in our day of what Apostle John was talking about, and also going back to the ancients in Zechariah 2. Now here is evidence of the ancient stadia, or they're calling it stadium here, but this is ancient Salamis, which you can see in Acts chapter 13, verse 5, where Apostle Paul was. And this is what we were talking about before. There's facilities like this. This is called the theater. And then this one is called the amphitheater. So the building is here. And then the race of a stadia is this distance here in white. And it literally says in Greek, stadia, stadion. It's hard for us to see right here. It's not the best photograph, but we have another example of it here. And here you can see, once again, there's the circular amphitheater. And then the race is the stadia, which goes around. So again, here's the theater, like this one. There's this building here, which is this one. And this is the amphitheater and the stadia. So we do know what the measurement is. And that measurement of Ezekiel comes very close to this. And lastly, after our stadion and line, we have something called a sacred mile, or million in the Greek. This is what Christ said in Matthew 5. He said, someone asked you to go to a mile, go the extra mile. So in Greek, this is a million, okay? And this is 5 stadion. So 5 stadion, or 5 races, is 5,250 feet. As seen in Ezekiel 45:3, the sanctuary is 25,000 cubits. All right? If we take those cubits, we multiply it by feet, this comes to 52,500 feet, which is 10 miles, precisely. So this shows us that we have our proper mile as well, because there's other dimensions of landmass that are greater than the temple, and those are measured in miles. Okay? So we have 10 miles, which is 10 times 5,250 feet, okay? And each mile is that measurement. Thus, 25,000 cubits is 10 miles. Now, what's also critically important for you to understand is the principle we're showing you here. and that is the descriptions by Ezekiel. They are additional descriptions to what we call the House of David pattern, or the first temple. So Ezekiel doesn't tell us every single detail if that detail was already provided for us by David in his patterns of the first temple. So what Ezekiel does is he focuses on the Ezekiel temple with things that are new or additional details, okay? But the assumption is that you're going to take his information and apply it to the first temple. The reason this is important is that the Ezekiel temple does not give the heights. It does not say how high the building is. All right, the only heights that are given in the whole complex is the height of the altar, the height of the table, and the height of the wall. The buildings, it doesn't say. It doesn't say, okay, it's this height in cubits. It doesn't say that. So in order to understand how high it is, we take the principle of, okay, he didn't provide the heights. That must mean the heights are provided for us in the pattern that David had. And that's going to be in 1 Kings. Mostly we're going to look at 1 Kings chapter 6 and 7. That provides a lot of these details. It's also in 2 Chronicles. But in 1 Chronicles chapter 28, it says, David wrote the pattern for the porch, the houses, the treasuries, the upper chambers, the inner chambers, the house for the mercy seat, the pattern of all by the Spirit, the courts and the chambers around the house. So David got this pattern. So this is a early foundation for us. So Ezekiel is building his temple off this foundational pattern. All right, so then we go back to 1 Kings, and it tells us the height. Okay, the house, the length was 60 cubits. Its width was 20 cubits. It is 30 cubits high. So when it's talking about the house here, it's talking about the temple. So Ezekiel, he tells us the temple, he tells us about the holy place, 40 cubits long, 20 wide. Okay, he tells us the porch. He tells us the Holy of Holies. He doesn't tell us the height. What's the height? We go back to the first temple. We go back to the first temple, and it is the same measurement. You can see 60 cubits long. Well, that factors in the holy place and the Holy of Holies. 40 cubits plus 20 cubits, 60 cubits. All right, the width of that, 20 cubits. And we get the height of 30 cubits from the first temple. All right. And you can see the porch of the first temple, 20 cubits long, 10 cubits wide. Ezekiel's, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide. So there's a slight difference there, you see. Okay, so we go by this for obviously Ezekiel's, but where do we get the height? We have to go back to the first temple. All right, same thing with the temple chambers. There are chambers inside the temple. In my Father's house, there are many mansions, many rooms, okay? Ezekiel doesn't give us all the details of this room, okay, but the height is there. All right, they go by 3 levels, okay? 5 cubits, 6 cubits, 7 cubits, and the height of the chambers is 5 cubits. Ezekiel tells us they are galleries in 3 stories, door over door. And then there's another place where they're called side chambers. So again, we have to go back to the first temple to get additional information. And then he built 20 houses, okay, for the house. Well, between the chambers was the wideness of 20 cubits around, okay? So what you can see is that Ezekiel does not give us the height, but David does. In the first temple that Solomon built, these measurements of the heights of the buildings are provided for us. In the oracle were 2 cherubim of an olive tree. They're 10 cubits high, okay? And there are 2 levels of cherubim due to their height. Now, what happens in Ezekiel's is that the cherubim and the palm trees are etched on the walls. So we assume that the height here is going to be the same height as was in the first temple. So when the cherubim are portrayed on the walls, they're 10 cubits high. So Solomon built his house. That's the king's palace. This is the building that is to the west. And it is 60 cubits high, and it's half the height of the north and south chambers. So we do get, we'll get into that in a second. Now, very important, another couple buildings, very critical for you to understand, is in the first temple is called the House of the Forest of Lebanon, okay? And in the Ezekiel temple, it's called the North and South Chambers. Now, in Ezekiel, he tells us clearly it's 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide. Well, that is precisely the House of the Forest of Lebanon in the first temple. It's 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide. And we get, once again, in the first temple, the height is 30 cubits. So we get the height of the north-south chambers in the Ezekiel temple is 30 cubits high. He tells us in the first temple there's 45 pillars, 15 in a row. So we apply those pillars that run inside the north and south chambers. All right, we have another building in the first temple called the Porch of the Pillars. And it is 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. You'll notice that we're calling it the scribe's chamber because next to the king's house was something called the scribe's chamber we see in Jeremiah 36:12. So we have a space in the Ezekiel temple. He doesn't tell us exactly what it is, besides it's the pillars of the court. This is the expression Ezekiel uses to describe, and what we believe this is there's pillars in the court, but there's an additional space in that court to allot for a building that is precisely the Porch of the Pillars in the first temple, which is 50 cubits long by 30 cubits. This will answer many of the questions you have. Why do you have the height of the temple this? Why do you have this other building that you call the scribe chamber or the Porch of the Pillars? This is the reason. We go back to the first temple and we get the dimensions. First temple has an altar of brass of 20 cubits essentially, and the Ezekiel temple, it is slightly smaller, 20 cubits, and has a length of 14 cubits. There's a great court of chambers roundabout, all right, and the Ezekiel temple has this as well. It's called the outer court and has 30 chambers. Okay, so again, the Ezekiel temple's very much matching up with what we see in the first temple. Very, very similar. There's just a few points of interest that we don't have information in Ezekiel that we have to go back. In Ezra, it says the Cyrus decree. It says build the house. It doesn't say temple. It says house. It is 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide. So again, we apply this height, okay, to the king's house, okay, because it tells us the north and south chambers, the height is in the middle of the building. So Ezekiel calls it the building. We're calling it the king's house, and that is the house that the king resides in. Okay, what have we learned? Well, we've learned something that's extremely important in terms of measuring the temple, because the temple is the main feature of what we know about in the millennium. Okay, it is the temple. And unfortunately, you guys are building your own house, and you're not focused on his house. So most of this is going to be very new information for you. We have taught on this before. We have shown you in the cubit and some other things. Now we're going to get into the actual details of the whole complex, and we're going to have teachings on the buildings, their purpose, how Christ taught this, okay, in parables. It's going to be very, very exciting. But we cannot proceed until we know how to measure. Okay, what is a cubit? What is a reed? Okay, what is a measuring line? Okay, what is a stadia? Okay, these things are important for us to understand before we can proceed into getting into the buildings and structures. We have to measure, and we have to find the measurements in the first temple. That's the purpose of this video. Okay. Now, we do hope to get the website updated and get these documents posted on the website. This will be in Course 5, Millennium. Okay. There is a new playlist there, 3D Temple, and the series of videos will be going corresponding in that playlist. We do have a previous playlist called Show the Pattern. We also got into other details that we won't be able to cover here because now we have the model, okay? So a voice came from the throne saying, "Praise our God, all you his servants that fear his name, both small and great."